Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. I am spending October 12th in Spain and I am very impacted. I want to share this impact with you, but first, this is Latina Literati. October 12th is called El Día Nacional de España, or Spanish National Day. It's also considered Hispanic Heritage Day, and it was absolutely shocking to me to see that it is celebrated in Spain with military parades, with flyovers by military airplanes. Every single aspect of the Spanish military, from the Navy to all of the special units, parade through the streets, are greeted by the royal family, and it just felt very conflictive for me because I come from a place where we celebrate this day as Indigenous Peoples Day. And Indigenous Peoples Day recognizes that there were people where the Europeans arrived. And so to celebrate this as a day of kind of military Spanish power felt almost, it was sad, and I don't want to say it was hurtful, but I just felt very uncomfortable in the midst of all of these Spaniards saying, you know, Spain is the greatest thing on earth, and 1492 is a question of national pride, and, you know, we're the greatest. There was definitely some sense of unity among all Spanish-speaking countries, those in the Americas as well as those throughout the world that speak Spanish. So I guess the Spanish-speaking unity is a good element. Of the languages I speak, I would say Spanish is the most beautiful. But if you've ever heard indigenous languages, if you've ever heard, you know, Nahuatl, Maya, Aymara, they are so beautiful. And of course, an example that you hear a lot is apapachar, and that's a Nahuatl word that literally means to hug the soul. And when you hug someone you love, you hug them beyond the physical. You go to the ephemeral, to the mystical, to the spiritual. And so I feel like the indigenous languages that we don't know, that I didn't have a privilege to ever learn, their words are more profound perhaps than Western words, and are more encompassing perhaps than the languages, the words that, and the concepts that we're able to use. And that's just an example of how what we know, it seems so narrow compared to what we don't know about our indigenous ancestors. And so I just really wanted to share that this national day that is celebrated throughout Spain, and again, being in a place like Catalonia, there's a lot of controversy because many of the portions of Spain want to be more independent. They want to be self-governing. And so all of this adds to protests against Spain as a central government and unity. And of course, there were fascists in the streets saying anybody who is not Spanish within their definition of Spanish, mostly immigrants, you know, was not welcome. And so that again also was a little bit hurtful because that's not what you want. You want an inclusive society. You want a society where people are judged by their actions and not by the color of their skin or the religion or faith that they follow. And of course, you had that in the time of Andalusia, of the great Moorish states here, but that's another video. Since the American Indian movement began in the 70s, even the 60s, there was a call to reclaim this celebration of this quote-unquote discovery of this continent, which never occurred. There were millions and millions of indigenous people from Canada all the way down to Chile, Tierra del Fuego, living in these areas for tens of thousands of years. We're talking 10,000, 15,000, some now 20,000 years. So to say that somehow some European, you know, fell upon a Caribbean island and discovered it is just preposterous. And so the reclaiming of this day as the Indigenous Peoples Day seems only right. It seems that, you know, we need to honor those whose memory is very limited because the diseases that came before the Europeans even arrived, decimated the vast majority of the indigenous population in the entire continent. The only reason that the Spaniards were able to take over the millions of people in these areas is because they first decimated them with disease for which they had absolutely no immunity. Imagine there was no such thing as a cold, let alone influenza, let alone smallpox, and all the other diseases, the terrible diseases that were brought by the Europeans. And so again, Indigenous Peoples Day is a time to say we honor those that, as they say in Canada, were the First Nations, were the first people who lived on the land that we now live on today, if you live in the Americas. So this clash of civilizations, this clash of mindsets, this coming together of languages, because in the end, I'm a product of both. I have indigenous ancestry and I have European ancestry, and so it's conflictive, to say the least, to think, okay, so there's this National Day of Spain and it's celebrating all this militaristic aspects of the Spanish government, and there is some unity in the Spanish-speaking countries because there is representation from, for example, Bolivia, Ecuador, Chile, Venezuela, Colombia. I mean, there were some South American, but I definitely did not see any Mexican and Central American representation in terms of the dancers that were involved. And I was kind of glad because I thought, wait a minute, the king wasn't even invited to the taking of power last week for not apologizing for the genocide during the conquest. So these issues are still very much alive today. And I think it's interesting that Spain, whose population is actually falling quite precipitously, and the only reason the Spanish economy can survive is because of the millions of immigrants from, of course, North Africa, but also all of the countries of Latin America, millions and millions of people from that. We've talked about the reconquest of Spain before. It is real. Everywhere you go, the people who are actually doing the day-to-day work are from other countries. Yes, you meet Spaniards, but you meet a whole lot more Latin Americans working everywhere. So in any case, it's a kind of dependent relationship, and at the same time, you feel like there is definitely some tension there. And I just wanted to share this day that here in Spain is called Día de España, the day of Hispanidad, of la lengua española, of Spanish unity, of Spanish-speaking countries' unity. And at the same time, in the continent where we are, Indigenous Peoples Day is really important. It's really something that we should all participate in. If you've ever been to a sunrise ceremony, if you've ever been to a gathering, if you've ever been part of sacred ceremony, I mean, you understand how powerful these gatherings are, and very, very different than what I saw here through the streets of Catalonia. So I wanted to share that with you, and of course some great books to recommend. So there are two books that I wanted to recommend to you. The first is the actual eyewitness description of the conquest of Mexico by Bernal Díaz de Castillo. If you haven't read it, it's fabulous because obviously it's the Spanish perspective, but even that perspective is one of documenting genocide and documenting the destruction of the greatest libraries that were existed in these halls that you just can't imagine. These scrolls would simply be burned because, of course, the way to conquer people is to have them forget their history, right? To supplant their truths with your truths. And that's why many of the churches are built on top of temples, and there's so many examples of this, what some people would call syncretism, but it's truly just supplanting one civilization with the other. So that book is an absolute basis if you want to understand the clashing of these two cultures, and then really the rise of what some people call la raza, the new race, a combination of people like myself that are indigenous and of Spanish origin. The second book I want to recommend is the Tupac Amaru Rebellion by Charles Walker. And yes, Tupac, the one that you know, was named after the original Tupac Amaru, who was a leader, the son of a leader in South America. And he was able to gather different linguistic groups and different cultural groups. It was the largest rebellion against the Spaniards. And even though eventually it was quashed and he was executed, he was able to do something that had not been done before, was to bring everyone together and understand that the goal was to get rid of the settler colonial state apparatus representation. And so that's really, really an important part of history in the 1700s in South America. So this was the most important event in South America in the 1700s, when all of these groups gather together in rebellion and are able to really make the Spanish stop and have to really fight for the colonial settler conquest and to finish it. Really interesting time, and it's a great book. Highly recommend it. So as always, check your local library, your local bookseller. We love our local booksellers. We love our local libraries. And as always, we include independent bookseller links below in case you want to acquire these books, new or used. So thank you so much, and let me know what you think about October 12th and what it means to you, and how you celebrate, if you celebrate it. And of course, what you're reading. We love to get book recommendations. So thank you so much for this joint journey, and we'd love you to subscribe to Latina Literati, and as always, con mucho cariño, mucho salud, mucho amor. Gracias.
Un día llorona cuando al pasar yo te vi.